The rain had not touched Karachi's glass towers in 3 months, and when the sky finally broke, the city glistened like a thing newly born. Dr. Amina Qureshi leaned against the observation deck's railing, watching the storm blur the horizon, her reflection ghosting in the glass. Behind her, machines hummed, whispering in voices more familiar to her than any human colleague. She was 40, sharp-eyed, and weary from the constant tug-of-war between the politics of Earth's fragile alliances and the demands of her research. For a year, she had lived with a persistent ache that humanity was preparing for something it did not yet understand. The message had come 2 weeks earlier, hidden in the radio noise of Jupiter's magnetosphere. No natural pattern could account for it. No machine error explain it away. The signal was deliberate. Structured pulses, rhythms too precise to be coincidence. It was not the first time Earth had intercepted strange whispers from space, but this one carried quality that unsettled her. The faint mathematical echo of human speech patterns. Not mimicry, but resonance, as though whoever sent it had anticipated human cognition. Her superior, Admiral Ortega of the Earth Defense Accord, had been cautious, unwilling to reveal the discovery beyond a handful of trusted officials. For the first time in centuries, Earth had found an uneasy balance. Nations cooperating under a single umbrella government, their rivalries muted by the necessity of survival. Yet beneath the surface, old mistrust lingered, and Ortega feared that if the message became public, humanity would fracture under the weight of speculation. Amina, however, believed secrecy was the greater danger. She had spent her life studying signals, teaching machines to find meaning in static, and she knew this was no accident. The call came late at night, just as the storm began. Ortega's voice was clipped, devoid of hesitation. "We found them," he said. "Or perhaps they found us. A ship is inbound." The words did not surprise her. In her bones, she had known the message was not a test, not a probe cast blindly into the void. It was an invitation or a warning. She packed her files into a single tablet, left her apartment dark and unguarded, and boarded a shuttle bound for Geneva, where the Accord maintained its most fortified command. At the summit chamber, the air was heavy with a scent of fear disguised as determination. Generals, ministers, and scientists ringed the table, their faces pale in the cold white light. Holographic projections hovered above the center, an object vast and symmetrical, approaching Earth on a trajectory that defied the crude constraints of human propulsion. The alien ship was not massive by planetary standards, but large enough to dwarf the International Fleet's flagships. It carried no visible weapons, no recognizable design, only smooth arcs of silver-blue metal that shimmered like liquid under the sensors. "This," Ortega said, his voice reverberating across the chamber, "is not theory. It is not speculation. It will be here in 6 days." Amina studied the hologram, her pulse quickening. The vessel looked impossibly elegant, designed with a purpose humans could not yet guess. For a moment, she imagined it was beautiful. Then she remembered the signal, the way it had bent human mathematics back upon itself, and felt a prickle of unease. "We must prepare a greeting," she said, breaking the silence. "If they chose to announce themselves, it means they want contact, not conquest." A murmur spread among the delegates. Some nodded, others scowled. One general slammed his hand on the table. "That's an assumption. They could be measuring our defenses, lulling us into complacency before they strike." Ortega's gaze swept the room, calculating the balance of fear and reason. "Both possibilities are true," he admitted. "That is why Dr. Qureshi is here. She will lead the analysis of their communications, and she will help us determine their intent. But we must also ready our fleets." The tension in the chamber thickened, but Amina held her ground. She had never been a soldier, but she knew that every war in history had begun the same way, with fear drowning out the possibility of understanding. She remembered her father's words, spoken to her when she was a girl. Humanity's strength lies not in its weapons, but in its refusal to bow to inevitability. Later, alone in the data archives, she replayed the original signal. The rhythmic pulses flowed across her screen like waves, coated with patterns that hinted at something more than numbers. She slowed the sequence, fed it through her linguistic algorithms, and froze when the machine returned a translation not in words, but in structure. It was a question that seemed to echo inside her mind. Who are you? She sat back, heart racing, the storm outside hammering against the glass. For all their power, for all their speed, the beings who sent this message had not introduced themselves with dominance. They had asked. It was a small thing, perhaps even a trick, but to Amina it felt like the opening of a door no human had ever dared to knock upon. And yet, she could not ignore the edge of menace woven through the gesture. If they could shape a question so perfectly attuned to human perception, then they had studied humanity long before revealing themselves. That meant they knew Earth's weaknesses as well as its strengths. When she brought her findings to Ortega, his expression hardened. A question is not an olive branch. It could be an interrogation. They want to know what we are worth, whether we are a threat or prey, or whether we are equal. Amina countered. The Admiral did not respond, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed a fear he would not voice. 6 days was a short span for a species to prepare for its first encounter with intelligence beyond Earth. Yet as Amina left the chamber, she knew the true confrontation had already begun. It was not a question of ships or weapons, but of meaning, of whether humanity could prove itself more than fragile animals clinging to a small blue world. Outside, the storm finally eased, the night sky opening to reveal stars glittering with unblinking patience. Somewhere among them, the ship drew closer. Somewhere within it, an answer waited, one that might shatter or elevate the fragile story of mankind. Amina whispered to herself as if the storm could carry her words to the approaching vessel. We are not what you think we are. And for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of all humanity pressing against her shoulders, daring her to prove it true. Would you like me to continue Section 2 in the same style right after this? Or would you prefer me to first outline the beats of Section 2 before I dive into writing it? The ship arrived not in silence, but in a soundless pressure that pressed against the minds of every human tuned to the broadcasts. It emerged from the dark above the Atlantic, descending through the atmosphere with impossible ease, not disturbing a single cloud as though air itself parted to obey its will. People across Earth watched the live transmissions with breath caught between terror and awe. For some, it was vindication. For others, the confirmation of their deepest fears. Dr. Amina Qureshi sat in the Accord's command chamber, the vessel's image projected large above the table. Its surface rippled faintly, alive with patterns that defied physics. No thrusters, no antennas, no markings of ownership, just flowing silver blue arcs bending light in ways human instruments could not explain. Ortega stood beside her, jaw rigid, eyes flicking across the streams of data scrolling in the air. His military uniform was immaculate, but Amina could sense the exhaustion in the rigid lines of his posture. They want us to see them, Ortega muttered, voice low enough that only she could hear. Every movement they make is a performance. Before she could answer, the signal came again. This time it was not radio waves, but something deeper, a resonance woven into the planet's own magnetic field. It bled into sensors, into comms, into the very marrow of those sensitive enough to feel it. Amina's algorithms caught the sequence within seconds, translating the pulses into patterns recognizable to human cognition. She read the rendering on her screen and felt her breath catch. The same question, but with sharper edges. Who are you, really? The council chamber erupted with voices. Some demanded an immediate military demonstration. Others pressed for restraint. Ortega silenced them with a raised hand. His gaze swept the room, sharp and unwavering. We answer on our terms. Dr. Qureshi, prepare response. She hesitated. To speak for humanity was no small weight. Yet she understood why it had chosen her. Not because she was the most senior or the most loyal to the Accord, but because she listened differently. Where soldiers heard threats and politicians heard opportunity, she heard intent. And yet she feared the intent here was not benign curiosity, but a test of worth. She composed a reply in careful strokes, drawing from the simplest truths. We are humanity. We are many. We are flawed. We are learning. Who are you? The transmission carried on modulated frequencies, sent into the same magnetic resonance. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien vessel responded, not in words, but in spectacle. Its surface flared with light. colors cascading in fractal symmetry, each pattern shifting faster than the eye could follow. Instruments scrambled to record, yet none could make sense of the data. To Amina, it felt less like a reply and more like a mirror held up to her question. Look how much you cannot understand. Look how much you are not. The realization chilled her, though she kept her face steady. They're showing us, she said softly, that the gulf between us is vast, or that they want us to bow before it, Ortega countered. His tone carried iron certainty, but his eyes betrayed unease. Hours passed as the world held its breath. Protests erupted in some cities, prayers in others. Conspiracy theories bloomed like wildfire, but through it all, the alien ship remained poised, unmoving, as though awaiting humanity's next move. Amina worked tirelessly, parsing fragments of data, hunting for patterns. What unsettled her most was the precision of the question. Not what are you, but who are you? It implied recognition of individuality, of self, and yet it carried the weight of judgment. Late into the night, Ortega summoned her to his private office. The storm of voices from the council chamber was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of systems running on standby. He poured himself a glass of water, though he did not drink. You believe they came to test us, he said, his voice low. I believe they already know more about us than we know of them, she answered. Their question is not ignorance, it's pressure. They want to see how we define ourselves when forced to speak with one voice. And if we cannot, she met his gaze, steady despite the weight in her chest. Then they will decide for us. The Admiral set the glass aside, untouched. Then we must show them strength, not just words. We ready the fleets, and you continue your work. Between us, perhaps we can convince them humanity is not prey. His words lingered in her mind long after she left his office. Strength, in his eyes, meant ships and weapons, the projection of power. But she wondered if that was what the aliens sought, or if they would see it as nothing more than desperation dressed in steel. The next day, the alien vessel moved for the first time. Slowly, deliberately, it shifted its position to hover above Geneva, as if answering the Accord's unspoken challenge. Panic rippled across the globe, but no attack came. Instead, a beam of light descended, not destructive but soft, bathing the city in a glow that felt impossibly alive. Inside the chamber, alarms blared, but Amina stared at the projection, mesmerized. Within the light were symbols, shapes that bent and twisted into forms half recognizable, half beyond comprehension. Her algorithm strained against them, and then, impossibly, one resolved into a human word. Choice. The room fell silent. Ortega's hand clenched into a fist at his side. They're demanding something, he said. Amina whispered, almost to herself. No, they're offering something. The difference between demand and offer was everything, and she could feel the future of humanity balanced on the knife edge of interpretation. Around her, voices rose again, some shouting for defiance, others pleading for surrender, but she could not look away from the single word blazing in the alien light. Choice. For the first time, she felt certain the conflict was not merely between species, but within humanity itself. Would they define themselves through fear and arms, or through the courage to embrace an unknown invitation? The answer, she realized, would not come from the aliens. It would come from them. And with the ship hovering above their heads, waiting in silence, she understood that time was already running short. Would you like me to carry Section 3 directly into the climax of this confrontation, or should I first draft you a mini outline of possible resolution paths, military, diplomatic, philosophical, so you can choose the tone you want for the ending? The light above Geneva did not fade. It deepened, pulsing with a rhythm that felt disturbingly like a heartbeat. Every screen on Earth carried the same image, the alien vessel suspended in quiet dominion, the word choice shimmering within its luminous beam. For 3 days humanity lived in that silence, the pressure mounting as though the air itself had grown heavier. Governments scrambled to assert control, armies stood ready, and yet none dared fire the first shot. In the command chamber, Dr. Amina Qureshi felt the weight of history pressing down upon her. Admiral Ortega had grown more rigid with each passing hour, his faith anchored in military strength. He convened with fleet commanders, preparing contingencies for a strike. though he admitted none believed victory possible. Amina watched him from across the table, sensing the tension eating away at the man beneath the uniform. His eyes carried exhaustion, but also something harder, an unyielding refusal to surrender humanity's dignity. When the signal came again, it was not a word this time, but an image, an intricate rendering of Earth itself, hovering in the beam like a fragile marble. Around it danced countless simulations. Oceans boiling away, skies shrouded in ash, cities crumbling under storms. The message needed no translation. The aliens had given them a glimpse of endings, possible fates of a species that chose poorly. The council fractured under the pressure. Some demanded capitulation, arguing that submission might preserve humanity's survival. Others called for preemptive war, even annihilation, believing extinction preferable to subjugation. Amina listened to voices clash like swords, but beneath it all she heard what the aliens must have intended. Not dialogue, but division. That night, alone in the archives, she combed through every fragment of alien data. Patterns emerged, subtle threads woven through the signals, threads that mirrored not alien design but human thought. It struck her then with terrifying clarity. The visitors had studied humanity so thoroughly that their test was not a technology, but a spirit. They knew ships and weapons were irrelevant. What they wanted to see was whether humans could speak with one voice despite their flaws. She brought her findings to Ortega, who listened in silence, hands clasped tightly behind his back. When she finished, he exhaled a long, slow breath. "So it comes down to us," he said. "Not the fleets, not the governments. Us." "Us," she agreed. "And every choice we make reflects more than ourselves. They're watching not what we say, but who we become under pressure." For the first time since their contact began, Ortega allowed the massive command to slip. His voice softened, almost weary. "I have spent my life preparing for war, Amina, but perhaps the only way to defend humanity now is to prove it deserves a future without firing a shot." The following day, under his authority, Amina broadcast Earth's reply. It was not a speech crafted by politicians, nor a show of strength from the military. It was a mosaic drawn from voices across the planet. Children, teachers, workers, elders, all speaking fragments of what it meant to be human. Not perfection, not unity in the sense of uniformity, but shared defiance of despair, a refusal to surrender meaning to inevitability. The transmission lasted only minutes, but when it ended, silence fell again. The alien ship hovered unchanged, the beam still aglow, and for a moment the chamber filled with a terror that perhaps nothing had been achieved. Ortega stood tall, though Amina could see the tightness in his jaw, the question burning behind his eyes. Had they chosen well or signed their death warrant? Then, slowly, the beam retracted. The alien vessel pulsed once, twice, as though acknowledging the reply. Without sound or flare, it rose through the atmosphere, vanishing into the night sky as seamlessly as it had arrived. No message followed, no word of approval or condemnation, only absence. The world erupted in chaos, celebration, anger, doubt. Some hailed it as proof humanity had passed the test. Others feared the silence was a promise of judgment yet to come. But for Amina, standing beside Ortega in the quiet of the command chamber, the meaning was clear. The aliens had offered humanity a mirror, and humanity had not looked away. Ortega broke the silence first, his voice low. "Do you think we succeeded?" She met his gaze, the exhaustion in her bones matched by a fragile spark of hope. "I think we showed them the truth. That is all we could do." Outside, the night was clear, the stars sharp against the dark. Each one a question waiting to be asked. The fear had not gone, nor the uncertainty, but Amina felt something stronger stirring beneath it, a sense that humanity's worth was not measured in perfection, but in persistence, in the refusal to surrender identity even before an overwhelming unknown. She turned to Ortega and allowed herself the faintest smile. The story isn't over. It's only begun. And as the city lights burned beneath the vast sky, Earth waited, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, eyes still watched, and the next question was already on its way. Do you want me to expand this into a 3-part novel-style continuation? each section closer to 1,700 words, or keep refining these 1,000-word tight chapters into a full 5,000-word draft. The silence that followed the departure of the alien vessel was more unsettling than its arrival had been. Across Earth, relief and dread mingled like oil on water, each nation grasping for a narrative to make sense of what had transpired. Some called it triumph, a victory of human spirit. Others whispered a failure, that the aliens had simply dismissed them as unworthy. Dr. Amina Qureshi felt neither triumph nor failure, only a restless uncertainty gnawing at her thoughts. Every day she replayed the final images, the pulsing light, the single-word choice, and the ship ascending back into stars. Absence could mean anything. Admiral Ortega had buried himself in logistics, fortifying orbital stations and tightening fleet coordination as though the aliens might return in the next heartbeat. His determination gave the Council something solid to lean on, but Amina could see what lay beneath it. A fear so profound he dared not name it. Humanity's fragile unity, hard won under the weight of an external presence, was beginning to crack again. Protests spread across cities, demanding answers the Accord could not provide. Amina found herself drawn into endless interviews, debates, and lectures, asked to translate silence into meaning. She offered honesty instead, though honesty satisfied no one. Then, 3 weeks after the departure, the second signal arrived. It was weaker than the first, buried in the static of cosmic background noise, but its pattern was unmistakable. The algorithms trembled under its complexity, and when the message resolved, it chilled her more than any threat could have. Not a question this time, but a statement. You are not alone. The word seemed almost kind, yet the undertone was different, less a reassurance than a warning. When she brought the findings to Ortega, he read them in silence, his face pale in the glow of the projection. At last he muttered, "They weren't speaking only of themselves." Her mind leapt to the same conclusion. If the first visitors had studied humanity so closely, what of others? What if Earth had been placed not under judgment, but within a greater contest? Unseen players circling the fragile planet, each weighing its fate. News of the signal could not be contained, and when it spread, panic spread with it. The word alone carried too many interpretations. Preachers declared humanity had been marked by gods. Politicians roused fear of invasion from rivals unseen. Ordinary people looked at the stars with suspicion, as though the night itself had turned hostile. For the first time, Amina feared that the true threat to humanity was not what waited in the void, but how humanity tore itself apart under the pressure of expectation. In Geneva, during another heated council session, Ortega called for decisive unity. His voice rang like steel, commanding, but Amina caught the cracks beneath. If there are others, he declared, we must present strength, not weakness. Every fracture among us is an invitation to predation. She rose, her own voice calm but unflinching. Strength is not silence and fear wrapped in weapons. The message was not a conquest, but a relation. You are not alone. That means dialogue is still possible. If we respond with nothing but defiance, we teach them we are incapable of anything else. The chamber split again, voices crashing against one another. Some rallied to Ortega, some to Amina, but the divide deepened until even compromise seemed impossible. She saw then what the aliens had done. The first question had tested humanity's capacity for self-definition. The second had tested its ability to stand together in uncertainty. Each signal was a blade pressing into the fault lines of the human spirit. Later that night, Ortega summoned her to the observation deck above the city. Geneva glittered below, alive with protests and celebrations alike, a city caught between dread and determination. Ortega stood at the glass, hands clasped behind him, shoulders tense. They are forcing us to choose a story, he said, his voice low. Either we are prey, or we are predators. There is no room for in-between. Amina stepped beside him, the city lights flickering in her eyes. Then perhaps the test is to refuse their framing, to insist we are more than prey or predator, to prove that humanity cannot be reduced to a single answer. He turned to her, the weight of command etched deep into his features. And if they will not accept that answer? She looked back at him, unflinching. Then we show them anyway, not for their approval, but for ourselves. For a long moment, Neither spoke. The hum of systems filled the silence, punctuated by the distant roar of the city below. Ortega's expression softened just slightly, as if her words had pried loose something he had long buried. The next day, she began her work anew, not to decipher alien codes this time, but to craft a response drawn from humanity's refusal to fit into alien categories. She called for artists, poets, mathematicians, and philosophers, gathering fragments of expression from every corner of the planet. Where Ortega built fleets, she built meaning, weaving a tapestry of voices that refused simplification. It was fragile, imperfect, contradictory, but it was human. When she transmitted a message into the void, her heart pounded with both fear and hope. No immediate reply came, only the unblinking silence of stars. Ortega stood beside her, his hands folded tight, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We may have just signed our death sentence." Or, she answered, eyes fixed on the night sky, "we may have just shown them why we deserve to live." The stars offered no response. Yet for the first time, Amina felt no fear in the silence. It was not absence, but possibility, and within it, the faint promise that humanity's story had only just begun to be written. Would you like me to continue beyond Section 4 into a serialized expansion, like Section 5, 6, etc., so this evolves into a full-length novel, or keep it tight as a contained short story cycle?